The Mirror House. The winter wind was cold and mean when the Crawford family first saw their new house. It was a big white house with 3 floors, sitting alone in the dark woods of Maine. Snow was falling hard that December day in 1897. James Crawford had lost his job at the bank in Boston, so the family had to leave everything behind and start over. "Well, here we are," James said. His breath made white clouds in the cold air as he stopped the horse and wagon. "Our new home." Elizabeth Crawford pulled her warm shawl tighter around her. She looked at the big house with worry in her eyes. Next to her, 14-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Thomas looked scared too. "It's so big," Emma said quietly. "That means more room for all of us," James said, trying to sound happy. "We'll have space to spread out and be comfortable." Thomas held his mother's arm tight. "I don't like it. It looks like it's watching us." "Don't be silly," James said. He jumped down from the wagon and helped his family down. "It's just a house. You'll love it once we get settled." The trip from Boston had been long and hard. They rode the train for days, then traveled in the wagon for 2 more days. Elizabeth had tried to stay strong for the children, but she was getting more worried as they got further from other people. Now, looking at this big empty house in the middle of nowhere, she wondered if they had made a big mistake. "It'll be warmer inside," James told them, seeing Elizabeth's worried face. "The man who sold it to us said everything works fine." As they walked through the deep snow to the house, Elizabeth noticed something strange. Every window had heavy curtains pulled tight. No light came out anywhere. The house looked completely dark, even though it was only late afternoon. "James," she started to say, but he was already walking fast to the front door, excited to show them their new home. As they got closer to the house, they heard a strange sound from inside. It sounded like someone crying, but very far away. James laughed, but it didn't sound natural. "Just the wind in the chimney," he said. "Old houses make lots of noises." "Are there other families living nearby?" Elizabeth asked, pulling Thomas closer to her. "The nearest neighbors are about 10 miles away," James said as he tried to put the key in the lock. His hands were shaking from the cold. "But we don't need neighbors. We have each other." The door opened with a loud creak. Inside, everything was dark. James lit a lantern, and the light showed a big hall with stairs going up to the 2nd floor. Dust was everywhere, and the air smelled old and musty. The inside of the house was freezing cold. James lit more lanterns, showing furniture covered with white sheets. Elizabeth touched a table and left a clean line in the thick dust. "Why would someone leave such a nice house?" she asked. James shrugged. "The man who sold it said the last family just left suddenly. Couldn't handle living so far from town, I guess. But the price was good, and we can make this work." "It's so cold in here," Emma complained, hugging herself. "I'll get a fire going," James promised. "Thomas, help me bring in our things from the wagon. Emma, see if you can find more lamps in the kitchen." As the family split up to do their work, Elizabeth stayed in the main hall. Her eyes were drawn to a big painting on the wall. It showed a family, mother, father, and 3 children, standing in front of what looked like this same house. But something was wrong with the painting. All the faces looked sad and scared, and their eyes seemed to follow her as she moved. She stepped closer to read the small sign at the bottom of the frame. "The Whitmore family, 1875, it said. Something about the painting made her feel sick. Maybe it was the way the mother's hand was gripping her daughter's arm so tight, or the way all their eyes looked so afraid. Elizabeth quickly looked away and went to help James bring their things inside. That night, the family sat close together around the fireplace, eating bread and dried meat. Outside, the wind howled and made the old house creak and moan. "I don't like it here," Thomas said in a small voice. "Shush now," Elizabeth said, trying to comfort him. "It's just a house. We'll make it feel like home." Emma, who was usually braver than her brother, was already making plans. "Do you think there are any other children living around here?" James and Elizabeth looked at each other. "The nearest family is 10 miles away," James said. "They have a boy about Thomas's age." 10 miles, Emma said, looking sad. "That's so far." We have each other, Elizabeth reminded them. And when spring comes, we'll be busy fixing up the property. Your father has big plans for this place. James nodded with excitement. The land here is good. We can grow vegetables, maybe get some chickens. There's a barn out back that just needs some fixing up. By next fall, we'll have enough food stored up to last through the winter easily. What about animals for milk and eggs? Elizabeth asked, remembering the empty barn they had seen. I'll go to the nearest town next week and buy a cow, some chickens, maybe a pig if the price is right, James said. Emma picked at her bread. What about school? James's smile got smaller. Well, that's something we'll have to figure out. The nearest school is in town, too far to travel every day. Your mother will have to teach you here at home. Elizabeth nodded, though the thought of being the only teacher for both children worried her. In Boston, both Emma and Thomas had gone to real schools with other children and proper teachers. Emma was especially smart with numbers and reading. Would Elizabeth be able to teach them everything they needed to know? As they got ready for bed, laying out their blankets near the fire until they could set up proper beds, they heard a strange sound from upstairs. It sounded like someone walking around very slowly. James said it was just the house settling or maybe mice, but Thomas insisted it sounded like footsteps. Real human footsteps. It's an old house, son, James said firmly. Old houses make all kinds of noises. The family didn't sleep well that first night. Every creak and groan of the old house made them wake up. Elizabeth found herself listening to every sound, trying to figure out what was making the noise. During the night, Elizabeth woke up to hear footsteps again, this time right above their heads. The second floor was empty except for old furniture they hadn't looked at yet. She shook James awake. Someone's upstairs, she whispered. James listened. The footsteps moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, slow and steady. Stay here with the children, he said, reaching for his rifle. Elizabeth grabbed his arm. Be careful. James climbed the narrow stairs. Each step creaked loudly under his weight. The second floor was completely dark. He held up his lantern, making long shadows dance across the walls. Hello? He called out. Is anyone there? The footsteps stopped the moment he started climbing the stairs. Now there was only silence as he went from room to room. He found nothing but furniture covered with sheets and old trunks. No signs that anyone had been there, no open windows or doors. When he came back downstairs, Elizabeth was sitting up, wide awake. There's nobody there, he told her. Must have been the wind moving something around up there. Elizabeth didn't look convinced. It sounded like real footsteps, James. Human footsteps. Well, whoever it was, they're gone now, he said. Try to get some sleep. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow. But sleep didn't come easily for Elizabeth that night, or for many nights after that. The next morning brought sunshine and clear skies. In the daylight, they could see how much work the house really needed. The paint was peeling off the outside walls, some shutters were hanging crooked, and the front porch was sagging on one side. It's going to take a lot of work, James said. But by summer we'll have this place looking good again. Elizabeth could see just how big the job really was. The house was huge but had been empty for a long time. Everything needed fixing. Let's focus on making the house comfortable to live in first, Elizabeth suggested, trying not to show how worried she was. Then we can work on everything else. James nodded, but he was looking at the dark woods around the house. I thought I saw something moving in the trees. Elizabeth looked where he was pointing but didn't see anything. Probably just a deer. Yeah, probably, James agreed, but he kept staring at the woods for a moment before turning back to the house. You're right about priorities. House first, then everything else. While James checked the barn and other buildings, Elizabeth and the children started cleaning the house. They opened windows to let in fresh air, swept away dust, and took the sheets off furniture to see what they could use. Emma found a trunk full of old clothes in what would be her bedroom. There were dresses and petticoats from many years ago, still in good condition. Look, Mother, she called, holding up a beautiful blue dress with fancy beadwork. Isn't it pretty? Elizabeth looked at the dress, feeling the fine stitching. It is beautiful. I wonder why anyone would leave such nice things behind. Can I keep some of them? Emma asked. They might fit me if we make them a little smaller. Elizabeth hesitated. Something felt wrong about wearing clothes left behind by people who had disappeared. Let's put them away for now. Once we're more settled, we can decide what to do with them. In the kitchen, Elizabeth found something hidden behind a cabinet. It was a small hand mirror with a silver handle, very old but still shiny. She picked it up and looked at her reflection. For just a moment, she thought she saw someone else's face looking back at her, a woman with sad, frightened eyes. But when she blinked, it was just her own face again. She quickly put the mirror in her apron pocket, not wanting to think about what she might have seen. Upstairs, Emma and Thomas were going through the things left behind by the previous family. In what would be Emma's room, they found the trunk of old clothes. In Thomas's room, they found something much more interesting. Built into one wall was a tall mirror, almost as big as a door. The glass was old and had dark spots on it, but they could still see themselves clearly. "Look how big it is," Emma said, standing in front of it with Thomas. But as they looked at their reflection, something strange happened. Their reflections didn't move exactly when they moved. There was a tiny delay, like their mirror selves were copying them a second later. "That's weird," Thomas said, waving his hand. In the mirror, his reflection waved a moment after he did. "It's just an old mirror," Emma said, but she didn't sound sure. Old glass sometimes gets wavy. But then they noticed something else. In the mirror, they could see the room behind them, but it looked different. The furniture was in different places, and there were things in the mirror room that weren't in the real room. "Emma," Thomas whispered, "look at the bed in the mirror." Emma looked. In their reflection, the bed had someone lying in it, covered with blankets. But when they turned around to look at the real bed, it was empty. "We need to tell Mother and Father," Emma said, suddenly scared. But before they could move, the person in the mirror bed sat up. It was a woman with long dark hair and a white nightgown. She looked right at them through the mirror and smiled. But her smile was wrong somehow, too wide, with too many teeth. The woman in the mirror stood up and walked toward them. Emma and Thomas ran out of the room as fast as they could, slamming the door behind them. "Mother! Father!" they yelled as they ran downstairs. "There's someone in the mirror." James was just coming back from the barn when he heard the children screaming. Elizabeth rushed from the kitchen, and they all met in the main hall. "What's wrong?" Elizabeth asked, kneeling down to hug Thomas, who was shaking. "There's a woman in the mirror upstairs," Emma said, her voice shaking. "She was lying in the bed, but only in the mirror. And when she saw us, she smiled and started walking toward us." James frowned. "What mirror?" "The big one in Thomas's room," Emma explained. "It shows things that aren't really there." James looked at Elizabeth, then back at the children. "Show me." They all went upstairs to Thomas's room. The big mirror was still there, but now it looked normal. It showed their reflections properly, and the room behind them looked exactly like the real room. "I don't see anything unusual," James said, looking carefully at the mirror. "But there was a woman," Thomas insisted. "She was right there." James examined the mirror more closely. The glass was old and had some dark spots, but it seemed like a normal mirror. "It's just old glass. Sometimes old mirrors can play tricks on your eyes, especially when you're tired or nervous." Emma shook her head. "It wasn't a trick. We both saw her. Sometimes when we're scared or in a new place, our imagination can make us see things that aren't there," Elizabeth said gently. "It's normal." But she noticed something James hadn't. In the bottom corner of the mirror, scratched very lightly into the silver, were some words. "They come at night." She decided not to mention this to the others. That evening, as the family ate dinner downstairs, Emma kept looking up at the ceiling. "What's wrong?" Elizabeth asked. "I keep thinking about the woman in the mirror," Emma admitted. "What if she's still up there?" "There is no woman," James said firmly. "It was just the old glass playing tricks on you." But Elizabeth noticed that James kept glancing up at the ceiling too, and he kept his rifle close to his chair. As if to prove his point, they heard the strange walking sounds again, this time from the second floor. James immediately went upstairs to check, but like before, he found nothing. Just the house settling, he announced when he came back down. But later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the mirror and the words scratched in the corner. Finally, she got up quietly and went upstairs to look at it again. In the darkness of Thomas's room, the mirror looked different. The glass seemed to glow slightly with its own light. Elizabeth lit a candle and held it up to look at her reflection. At first, everything looked normal. But then she noticed that her reflection was wearing different clothes. In the mirror, she was wearing a long white nightgown instead of the brown dress she had on. And behind her reflection, she could see other people in the room, shadowy figures standing along the walls. Elizabeth spun around, but the real room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the figures were gone, and her reflection was wearing the right clothes again. She reached out to touch the glass, and as her finger got close to the surface, she felt cold air coming from it, like the mirror was an open window to somewhere very cold. Elizabeth quickly backed away and went back to bed, but she didn't tell James what she had seen. She was afraid he wouldn't believe her. The next day, James decided to go to the nearest town for supplies. It was a long trip and he would have to stay overnight. "I don't want you to leave us alone," Elizabeth said. "I have to," James replied. "We need food and other things. I'll be back tomorrow evening." "Please take us with you," Elizabeth begged. James shook his head. "The wagon can't carry all of us and the supplies we need. Besides, someone has to stay and keep the fire going in the house." Elizabeth watched him drive away with a feeling that something bad was going to happen. As soon as he disappeared into the trees, she hurried back to the house and locked all the doors. "Where did Father go?" Emma asked. "To town for supplies," Elizabeth answered, trying to sound calm. "He'll be back tomorrow." But she could see that Emma was worried too. The house felt different without James there, more dangerous somehow. That afternoon, while the children played checkers by the fire, Elizabeth decided to explore the house more carefully. She wanted to understand what was wrong with this place. In the kitchen, she looked more closely at the small mirror she had found. When she held it up, she didn't see her own face. Instead, she saw a woman with dark hair and a white dress. The same woman Emma and Thomas had seen in the big mirror upstairs. The woman in the mirror was crying. She opened her mouth as if she was trying to say something, but Elizabeth couldn't hear any sound. Then the woman pointed upward, toward the second floor, and shook her head as if warning Elizabeth not to go there. Elizabeth put the mirror down quickly, her hands shaking. When she picked it up again, it showed her own reflection normally. As evening came, Elizabeth made dinner for herself and the children. But every few minutes, she found herself looking at the mirrors around the house. There were many of them, small ones in the kitchen and hall, medium ones in the bedrooms, and the big one in Thomas's room. And in every single one, she started to see things that shouldn't be there. Faces looking back at her that weren't her own. Rooms that looked different from the real rooms. People moving around who weren't really there. "Mother," Thomas said suddenly, "the people in the mirrors are watching us." Elizabeth looked where he was pointing. In a small mirror hanging on the dining room wall, she could see figures standing behind their chairs, looking down at them as they ate. But when she turned around, nobody was there. "Don't look at the mirrors," she told the children quickly. "Just focus on your food." But it was too late. Emma had seen them too. "There are so many of them," she whispered. "They're in all the mirrors." Elizabeth stood up and began covering the mirrors with towels and blankets, anything she could find. But there were so many mirrors in the house, and every time she covered one, she seemed to find two more. As night fell, the figures in the mirrors became clearer and more active. They moved around the mirror rooms, pointing at the Crawford family and opening their mouths as if they were shouting, though no sound came through. "They want something from us?" Emma said, hugging Thomas close to her. Elizabeth had covered as many mirrors as she could find, but she knew there were more she had missed. And the big mirror in Thomas's room was too big to cover completely. "We'll sleep down here tonight," Elizabeth decided. All of us together by the fire. They made beds on the floor near the fireplace and tried to sleep, but it was difficult. Even with most of the mirrors covered, they could still hear sounds from upstairs, footsteps, voices, and sometimes what sounded like people trying to break through glass. Around midnight, Thomas woke up screaming. "They're coming out!" he yelled. "The mirror people are coming out!" Elizabeth and Emma woke up immediately. Upstairs, they could hear the sound of breaking glass, like a mirror had shattered. "Stay together," Elizabeth said, grabbing her rifle. They huddled by the fire while the sounds upstairs got louder, more breaking glass, footsteps, and voices that sounded like echoes from very far away. Then everything went quiet. Elizabeth waited for several minutes before going upstairs to check. In Thomas's room, the big mirror was completely shattered. Pieces of glass covered the floor, and cold air was blowing through the empty frame like an open window. But that wasn't the worst part. In the broken pieces of mirror scattered on the floor, Elizabeth could see hundreds of tiny reflections, and in each one, someone was looking back at her. The mirror people hadn't disappeared when the glass broke. They had just gotten smaller and spread out. Elizabeth ran back downstairs and found the children putting on their coats. "We have to leave," Emma said. "Right now." "But Father isn't back yet," Elizabeth said. "We can't wait for him," Emma replied, looking older than her 14 years. "Those things are getting stronger. If we stay, they'll find a way to get to us." Elizabeth knew Emma was right. She quickly gathered their warmest clothes and what food they could carry. They would walk to the nearest town, even though it was far and the snow was deep. As they prepared to leave, Elizabeth made one mistake. She looked back at the covered mirrors to make sure nothing was following them. But she had missed one, a small mirror by the front door. In it, she saw James. But he wasn't in town buying supplies. He was standing in a room full of mirrors, and his reflection was in all of them at once. He was reaching toward the glass from the inside, his mouth open as if he was screaming for help. Elizabeth realized with horror that James hadn't gone to town at all. Somehow, the mirror people had taken him into their world. "Mother, come on," Emma called from the door. Elizabeth took one last look at the mirror. James saw her looking and pressed his hands against the glass. Behind him, she could see all the other people who had been trapped in the mirrors. The Whitmore family from the painting, other families who had lived in the house, dozens of people spanning many years. "I'll find a way to get you out," she whispered to the mirror, then ran to join her children. The walk through the deep snow was hard, but they kept going. Behind them, they could see lights in all the windows of the house, even though they had put out all the lamps. The lights flickered and moved as if the mirror people were having a party now that they had the house to themselves. It took them all night to reach the nearest town. Elizabeth's feet were frozen and the children were exhausted, but they had made it. The people in town were kind to them. They gave them warm food and a place to sleep, and they listened to Elizabeth's story about James disappearing. But when she tried to explain about the mirrors, they looked at her strangely. "Mirrors can't trap people, ma'am," the town doctor said gently. "Your husband probably just got lost in the storm on his way to buy supplies." Elizabeth didn't argue, but she knew the truth. She also knew she couldn't go back to that house alone to try to save James. The mirror people were too strong, and she had to protect Emma and Thomas. A few days later, a group of men from the town went to look for James. They found his horse and wagon on the road to the next town, but no sign of James himself. The wagon still had money in it, so he hadn't been robbed. The men also checked the house. They found it empty, with broken glass all over the floor of one upstairs room. They thought maybe James had gone back to the house for something and had an accident with the mirror. Elizabeth never told them that she could see James in every reflective surface, windows, puddles, even the shiny surface of spoons. He was always there, always trying to get her attention, always reaching toward her from the other side. The Crawford family never returned to Maine. Elizabeth sold the house quickly, though she felt bad about not warning the new owners. How could she explain about the mirrors without sounding crazy? They moved to California, as far from the mirror house as they could get. Elizabeth never remarried. She spent all her time taking care of Emma and Thomas and trying to help them forget what had happened. The children got better as time passed, but they were never quite the same. Thomas couldn't stand to look in mirrors and would only wash his hands in basins where he couldn't see his reflection. Emma became afraid of anything shiny and always walked with her eyes down. Years went by. Emma grew up and married a good man who didn't ask too many questions about why she had no mirrors in their house. She had 3 children and was very careful to teach them never to stare into mirrors, especially at night. Thomas became a teacher, working with children who had been through terrible experiences. His colleagues admired how well he understood fear and trauma, never knowing it came from his own childhood nightmares. Elizabeth lived to see her grandchildren grow up. She found some peace in their normal, happy lives. But she never stopped seeing James in reflective surfaces, and she never stopped looking for a way to bring him back. When Elizabeth was old and dying, she told Emma one last secret. "I've been researching for 40 years, she whispered. There are other houses like ours. Houses where the mirrors are doors to another place. I found 3 people who escaped, and they all said the same thing." "What did they say?" Emma asked. "The mirror people aren't evil. They're just trapped like your father is now. They've been stuck in the mirror world for so long that they forgot how to be human. They want to come back to our world, but they can only do it by switching places with living people." Elizabeth took Emma's hand. "Your father is still alive in there. I see him every day. If someone could figure out how to break the mirrors at exactly the right moment, all the trapped people could come back." Emma held her mother's hand tighter. "Did you ever try?" Elizabeth shook her head sadly. "I was too scared of losing you and Thomas too. But maybe someday, someone braver than me will figure it out." After Elizabeth died, Emma inherited all her research boxes full of letters, newspaper clippings, and notes about other mirror houses. She read through everything, learning about families who had disappeared, houses that were abandoned suddenly, and strange stories about mirrors that showed things that weren't there. Emma never went back to Maine, but she used her mother's research to warn other people. She wrote letters to newspapers and spoke to anyone who would listen about the dangers of houses with too many mirrors. Some people listened. Others thought she was crazy. But every few years, she would get a letter from someone thanking her because her warning had saved their family from a house that felt wrong. A house where the mirrors showed things that shouldn't be there. The mirror house in Maine still stands today. It's been sold many times over the years, but no family ever stays long. Most leave within a few months, and they all tell similar stories: mirrors that show different rooms, reflections that move on their own, and the feeling that someone is always watching them. The current owners don't know about the history. The real estate agents have learned not to mention the families who disappeared or the strange accidents that happened there. They just focus on the beautiful old architecture and the peaceful forest setting. But if you ever find yourself looking at a house for sale, and you notice it has a lot of mirrors, be careful. Count them if you can. And if there seem to be more mirrors than rooms, or if your reflection doesn't look quite right, don't buy that house. Walk away quickly and don't look back at any shiny surfaces until you're far away. Because some mirrors aren't just glass. They're windows to places where lost people are still waiting to come home. And somewhere in the mirror world, James Crawford is still there, still trying to warn people about the house where reflections come alive. He's older now, but he hasn't given up hope that someday, someone will find a way to break the mirrors at just the right moment and set all the trapped people free. Until then, he waits with all the others, watching our world through every mirror, every window, every surface that shows a reflection. They're not trying to scare people, they're trying to warn them. So the next time you look in a mirror and think you see someone else's face for just a moment, don't ignore it. Look closer. It might be someone who needs your help to come home. But be careful, because if you stare too long into the mirror world, you might find yourself getting pulled in to join them. And once you're trapped in there, the only way out is to find someone else to take your place. The Crawford family learned this lesson the hard way, and their story serves as a warning that echoes through time. Some doors should never be opened, some worlds should never be explored, and some reflections should never be trusted. In houses with too many mirrors, the reflection might be the last thing you ever see of the real world.